It's going.
Hi, my name is Joan Marie Bednorz. I was born December 5th, 1933 in Chicago, Illinois.
In a house or in a hospital?
Hospital.
What was the name of the hospital?
I don't remember.
First of two kids?
Yes, oldest. My brother doesn't let me forget. He always says, this is my older, much older sister, and I am 5 years older than my brother, Bud.
And who was older, your mother or your father?
My mother,
By
1 year, and my mother's name was Mamie Marie Light, her married name. Her premarital name was Fritz.
Fritz.
Fritz. Mm-hmm.
And she was from Chicago?
She was born in Chicago, raised in Chicago, never left Chicago until they moved out to Arizona in 1971.
And what did her father do?
Her father was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia, came to this country when he was a very young boy, 15 years old, and he worked in the coal mines in West Virginia. And my grandmother, my mother's mother's name was, at that time, Catherine Svoboda, and she was born in Prague as well. However, she never called it Prague. It was always Praha. Praha.
Or did they come over together?
No. They
So
met. No, they didn't even meet in West Virginia. They were both in West Virginia. They met in Chicago. My grandmother came over. You might say she was like a nanny, and her fare and everything was paid for by a family, and she was indentured to this family for a period of time, and I don't know how long.
That was your mom's.
My mother's mother. And then...
Okay.
So your grandmother was a nanny?
Or an au
She
pair.
was a nanny for about 2 years, and during that period of time, she was still earning money, even though they paid her way over here, and she came over by boat. She sent every cent that she had back to Czechoslovakia. She brought her brother over, who was older than she was in the family. Then he got a job, and he worked in West Virginia in the mines as well. And he sent all his money back, brought over a sister. And during this period of time, though, my great-grandmother's husband died, so I never met him. But finally, they got the whole family over here because they earned enough money to bring everybody, and they brought my great-grandmother. So I remember her. I'm gonna cry.
It's okay.
And she died when I was about 4 years old, and I always called her Babichka. And that is great-grandma in Czechoslovakia. And she used to babysit me a whole lot. Why, I don't know, just the fact, I guess, that she loved me. And she always called me her little Irish washwoman. And she would get this big tub and a washboard, and I would have to wash clothes always. And it was just for play. I wasn't really washing clothes. But this was why she called me the Irish washwoman. And she let me go out and play in the snow, and then she would build a fire on the...
It snowed in Chicago?
Oh boy, did it snow in Chicago. And then they'd build a fire in this old cook stove that they had on one side. You could put coal and wood, and it would heat the oven. And she'd open the oven door and put my feet inside the oven to warm my feet.
You both have oven stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those were the days, yeah. And then
And where in Chicago was this?
in the Bohemian neighborhood. I don't know exactly where. I know it was off of Pulaski Road, and now it's called Crawford. They've changed a lot of the names. We lived not too far from there. We lived in a lot, when I was a little girl, we lived in a lot of different, they called them flats. And I can remember the very... Huh?
Is that like an apartment? A flat?
Yeah, I would say so. And there usually were brick buildings, 2 or 3 stories high. Some had basements, and they rented out all the different floors. Usually the landlord lived in one of the floors, but he chose usually the best floor, and people lived above and below. And I can remember this one when I was about 5 years old, and my brother was born, and we had this old-fashioned kitchen sink, and I loved to help my mother wash my baby brother. And she says, "You can hold little Bud if you want while I get the water ready." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I was standing like this holding him, and here's a towel rack right behind me. And she's got this old dishpan, which I have, and she put the water in it and put it on the side of the sink. And I said, "Oh, Mom, look at little Bud, look at little Bud." My brother had grabbed this towel rack.
Oh my
And
God.
he's a brand new baby, maybe a month, 6 weeks old, and he was a preemie, so he was only 5 pounds. And he was hanging there by himself, and I was so happy that he could hang there by himself. And
Grandma probably wasn't
my
quite as
mother
happy.
goes, "Oh my God!" I can remember it like it was yesterday. So anyhow, that's one of my brother's stories. He was a little angel to me.
Oh.
And let's see, as a child, I guess our favorite entertainment was listening to Lone Ranger on the radio, and we'd all sit around just like you would watching television, but we'd all
Who
sit
would
around.
come over?
That'd be my mom and dad and me when I was little, and then it was big family in Chicago. My grandma lived not far away. She was over at our house every day. My uncle was my mother's older brother, Uncle Harry. And
What did he do for a living?
What I remember him doing, what he did back then, I don't know, but what I remember him doing, he worked for, was it Motorola, Jerry?
Yes.
Motorola. And I know that he was the first one in the family to have a television. We were the second. And that was when I was in high school, probably around 1947, 46, something like that.
There weren't very many TV shows then, were there?
There weren't, no. There was Uncle Milty, and there was Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and then came along Ed Sullivan. That was good. That was in the early 50s. And
Was
of
there
course,
daytime TV or just in the
no,
evening?
no, evening. The only daytime was occasionally a baseball game, and it was always the Cubs. So whether other teams were on throughout the country, I don't know, but we always saw the Cubs.
So were you Cubs fans or White Sox fans?
I was a Cubs fan with my dad, and when I was about 3 years old, I went to a game at Wrigley Stadium and I saw Babe Ruth play. And so I guess I was, but he was a Yankee then. That was after they had traded him from Boston and he was a Yankee, or vice versa. Maybe
Yeah.
he went from Yankees to Boston, but
No, it was the other
anyhow,
way around. The curse of the Boston Red Sox.
curse to the Boston Red Sox, but it was going on at that particular time. And I don't know, that was, I can remember going to the game, but I remember more my dad telling me about it than I actually remember. So,
Did you get popcorn and Cracker Jack, or
that I don't remember.
how much was a hot dog?
I can remember my dad wearing a fedora hat.
And the
There
tie?
were no baseball. Yeah, probably. I don't remember the tie exactly, but it was a fedora
I see
hat.
pictures of
In
people in
fact,
ties, suit and ties
I
at the
have-
ball game.
Same, I know.
I have one of his old fedora hats. I don't think it's that same one, because this one was more like from the 40s and 50s when he was a salesman.
Now, did you guys have a car or take the street car?
We always had a car. My dad always had a car. In fact, that's how my mom and dad met. He was a mechanic, and she had to walk by his garage where he worked every day to go to home. And she was going, let's see, she worked in a dime store at that time. She was the original 5 and 10 girl. She's always sang that song. And as she walked by, he always whistled at her. And he was so full of grease, my mother said she didn't know if he was black or white. So when he finally cleaned up one day and he talked to her, he wanted to take her out, and she said, okay. So she was doing him a big favor going out with him, but she really did like him, so that was how they met. My grandparents, however, were in Chicago before my grandfather died. He died of cancer. This is my mother's father. They owned a laundry. And they were really considered pretty wealthy to own any kind of business during that particular time, but this is before the Depression, because my mother was about maybe 16, 17 years old at that time.
And then what year was she born?
she was born in 1911.
Great, you know all this.
1911. And my father was born in 1912, both in Chicago.
Well, tell us about that. Did you say they owned a laundromat?
They owned a laundry. There was no laundromat. They washed the clothes by the old way.
Didn't
Right,
they have-
cleaner.
Didn't they have a big garage too? What happened
They
to
had
that
the garage. The garage, you know what happened. The garage, after my grandfather died, my mother couldn't run that laundry by herself. And the kids were old enough that they had to go to school and they had their own, so
There was
she...
one brother and sister.
And my mother, an older brother, and a younger sister. 3 children, that's all.
So grandma was in the middle.
My mother was in the middle. Right. And anyhow, this garage was, my grandma still had to pay rent on it. They didn't own the building, they owned the business. So she closed down the business and they moved upstairs for a while, and she knew she had to do something with this downstairs, so she rented it out. And she knew at the time she was renting it that these people were not up to very good, but she needed the money.
They were shady characters.
They moved out of the upstairs, and the garage that she rented was the garage that you read about, that Al Capone's gang shot up. That was the big
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's
Day
Day
massacre.
Right. Right. Bugsy Malone was killed, and after that, I don't know what happened, but I'm hoping that the lease ran out and she didn't have to keep renting it out or something, because she was subleasing it is what she was doing. But she knew there was nothing good going on, and they were, all the alcohol and the booze was going in and out. She knew it was going on, but she still needed the money.
So she shoved it out to the gang. Subleased the garage
She
out.
was subleased it, to Al Capone. To Al Capone, yeah. That's who she leased it to. So that's the ghost in our closet there. And then when I was a little girl, my uncle and my dad had this car, this old model, was it a Model A that he talked about? Yeah. And he loved this car. And it got to the point, it got kind of old, and all the wax in the world didn't help. So one day he decided he's going to varnish it. So he varnished this car, and it was beautiful, shiny as could be. And I knew my uncle and my dad had something going, and we weren't exactly sure what it was, but we were all going for a ride one night. Now, for me to go for a ride at night was very unusual. So what we were doing was going to all these bars. My dad and my uncle had a punch board game going in these bars. Well, they go into this one, and all of a sudden they come running out fast as can be, and they jump in the, come on, let's get the hell out of here. And they're running, and we found out, I found out years later what was going on. But they were not going to talk about it. They were in the mob's area, and they had these punch boards, and the mob was after them. So
What's a punch board?
a punch board was like a gambling game that they had in bars, and it was this
okay.
board.
It's a fiber board,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
you would pay a dime or a quarter, and you'd punch a number out.
Okay.
And then you
And if
pull
it
this little
matched
piece
any
of
of the
paper
numbers-
out and look at this little piece of paper to see what it said on there.
If it matched the numbers on the board, then you got that amount of money.
Okay.
But this was like an extra income thing that my uncle got my dad involved in. But they was all with the mob, so they had to get out of that business in a hurry. They went and picked up all the rest of their punch boards and got out of it.
Yeah, that was smart.
And that was all before my brother was born.
And which uncle is this?
My Uncle Harry,
Right.
my mother's brother.
And did your dad have brothers and sisters?
My dad had a younger, my dad was the oldest. And no, I take it back. My dad had one older sister, but they were estranged, so I never really did know her. Her name was Nettie. And then my dad's name was Robert Garrett Light. And he had a younger brother and a much younger sister. And the older sister and the younger sister died before my uncle and my dad died. So
How about your dad's dad?
My dad's dad was born in Chicago, and he was a very tall man, about 6'6", 6'7", very handsome, had matty curly hair. And he was very robust, and he was a carpenter, made cabinets and woodworking. But he was so strong, I don't know how he got involved, but he was a football player. And I think it started out as a hobby, playing football, and he ended up playing for the Chicago Bears. And after the Chicago Bears, then he got released from them, and he got a job with the Green Bay Packers. And that's when the whole family moved up to Wisconsin. So my dad grew up primarily in Wisconsin, because my grandpa
In Green Bay?
in Green Bay area. That's where he played football. But they lived in Baraboo, Wisconsin, which was a very small town. And how far it was from Green Bay, I don't remember. But my grandfather died in Wisconsin, and then my
And
father...
have you met him?
No, he died before I was born. He died, as a matter of fact, when my mother was pregnant with me. So.
Oh, do you go swimming out in the lake?
Yes, one of his big activities to keep in condition, even when it was cold. He was a fantastic swimmer, and he had a limit. If you can believe this, he would swim miles, like 2, 3, 4 miles into Lake Michigan. And Lake Michigan is freezing cold, even in the summertime. It is cold. And he had a cigarette, and as I said, his hair was so nappy, he would put that cigarette, rolled up one that he used to make, in his hair, and he would swim out, and then he would light a match, lay on his back, smoke that cigarette, and swim all the way back. And my dad loved that story. He used to tell it a lot.
It's a good story.
It's a good story, yeah.
It's a real good story.
Yeah. And I never met that grandfather, never met either grandfather. And
How about the grandmother? on
my
your dad?
father's mother died when I was, my brother was a baby, so I was about 5 years old. Maybe 6.
And she died in
Yeah.
Wisconsin then?
No, she was in Chicago. My dad brought her to Chicago, and he had a small apartment. He paid her rent and everything. Even after my mom and dad were married, he took care of her. He took care of the whole family.
So your dad went to elementary and high school?
In Chicago mostly. Not elementary, high school in Chicago, because my grandfather, they came back to Chicago. But I have his graduation certificate.
Your dad?
My mother didn't finish high school. She went on to a stenographer school, and she learned shorthand, Greg shorthand, and typing, and she worked for a company called L. Klein. I can remember her talking about that, and it was a department store. And back then, the department stores, and I can remember, they had these chutes where you would go to a register, and they put it in this tube, and then they had these tubes that ran throughout the store, and they had one central place where all the money went, and they put this in the tube, and they closed it, and it went just like a vacuum, and it sucked it up into this, and then they shoot it back down again with your change or with a receipt or with whatever. But they had no cash registers, even in department stores when I was little. It was all done in one central place, all with a vacuum chute. It was really neat. I loved watching it.
Didn't she work in a factory too?
Well, that was during World War II. When I was, World War II broke out in 1941. I was
How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
I was in school also, and they announced it on the loudspeaker. And
You were like
of
8
course,
years old?
I was 8, yeah, and wasn't
It
even.
was right after your birthday.
Yeah, December 7th. My birthday is December 5th. And of course, the teachers all started crying, and we didn't know what was going on. And they were telling us, and they dismissed school. They sent us home. And I can remember then, different times, they would have this siren that would go off in school. It sounded just like in the movies. And we all had to go out in the hall, and we'd line up against the wall, and we'd lie down on the floor, flat, prone, and have to put our arms like this over our head, and those would be bomb drills.
How scary.
Huh?
How scary for a little kid.
Well, it wasn't because it was so surreal to us. We would go to the movies and we would see the newsreels. There'd always be newsreels, and we'd see all the war and all the everything going on and the bombs and everything, but it was like a movie to us. I mean, I was too little to really realize what was going
That was
on.
real.
That it was really happening,
Sure.
yeah. But one of the things I can definitely remember were the hardships that the entire family had, because besides money being very scarce, there were no tires available for your car. There was a gas shortage. There was meat shortage. There was buttermilk, cheese shortage. You had to have coupons, and they were given out by the government to buy gasoline, to buy sugar, to buy almost shoes, anything. I can remember my dad using old pieces of tire and going out and cutting out a piece of rubber to put on the bottom of our shoes to make them last longer. And he had this mastic, and he glued on, then he'd take a knife and trim it off. And the same thing, we wore the same shoes, probably all, half a size too small at least, for years and years. And that's the way it was. But we were lucky. At that time, my dad was a butcher. So we always had plenty of meat.
Why'd you go from mechanic to butcher?
Well, the butcher shop was in the same neighborhood, and they needed a driver, so he started out being a driver for this company called Furman and Foster, and worked his way up into being a butcher, and cutting the meat and doing it on the wholesale level. Then he did it on a retail level as well. But I can remember he was always on this truck, and I used to ride with him sometimes in the summer. It was neat because it was refrigerated. It was the coolest place around. And we'd go into all these stores, and all these people would be so happy. My brother would go too, and we'd get candy from the, and then of course my dad would always, you need this, you need that. He'd sell them that, and he somehow or another, it wasn't always legal, but we always had plenty of meat. So did my grandma, so did all my aunts and uncles, but we always had plenty to eat. We didn't have meat every day. A lot of meals we had soup. A lot of meals we had pancakes or scrambled eggs, but at least 2 or 3 times a week we had meat. So.
And then you said you vacationed in Wisconsin?
That was the neat, my dad. We always, and it wouldn't be just us, it would be the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I have lots of pictures in my mom's box in there. And we'd go fishing, and we'd always rent a cabin. And we wouldn't be in the same cabin with them. Oh, everybody had their own cabin. All the family
Where at,
had
in
their own.
Wisconsin?
Yeah, in Wisconsin.
Where at?
And around Baraboo, around where my dad grew up, and around the Dells. The Dells was a famous place that the Indians lived in, and it has all these beautiful cascade waterfalls, and you could take tours through it. Mm-hmm. Tours weren't much of a tour. You were in a rowboat, with a guy going like this, and that was the tour, but it was really neat. And my brother and my mom and dad always fished. We'd go up to Minnesota sometimes. There wasn't always Wisconsin. A few times we went up to Minnesota. And we'd always, my mom and dad would rent a cabin that had a boat. And of course, it was a rowboat, never had motors. And Bud and I would get tired of fishing, and it would be hot even out in the lake in Wisconsin, but cooler than Chicago. And we had this old target pistol. My dad set up a target for us, and can you believe he would let us sit there and shoot that gun? They were out in the boat fishing, and Bud and I became sharp. He was a sharpshooter when he was in the Army, and I became a very good shot.
Joni Oakley, they called you.
Joni Oakley. I was Joni Oakley. That was it.
You could shoot a rat between the eyes at 100 paces, right?
I did that.
I heard.
I did that. I did that in Houston. I saved your geese.
Did your mother or father ever have like a one-liner, like money doesn't grow on trees, or as my mother used to say, don't shit in your backyard?
Well, I don't know about exactly one-liners, but I do believe my dad was the original Archie Bunker.
Oh, okay.
So he had a lot of sayings, and all of them weren't nice.
Oh, okay. Then that's nice that you're going to refrain. Yeah.
But I don't know. We had a lot of fun. We did a lot of stuff on whatever they could afford. My mother never worked until during World War II, and then she got a job in a airplane factory in Chicago. And she didn't drive, so my dad had to drive her and pick her up. And she worked at night. That way she could be home when we got home from school. It was just the thing women did then, but she worked all night. She slept during the day when we were gone to school. But I can remember, and I still have one of them, this thing that she had to wear on her head to protect, you know, you had to wear a turban, you had to wear something, and of course the women didn't want to wear hair nets, not, you know, snoods they were called, and that would have just been, so she'd always tie this turban around, or else she bought, and this is hysterical, this turban that had hair here on the top. And it was this real blonde hair that came up. So she put this turban on, and here this fakey, awful-looking blonde hair poofed up here on the top. And she was kind of cute, you know. And that was the first time I ever saw my mother wear slacks. Up until then, she never wore pants. She had to wear slacks in the factory. And just looked just like one of those posters, you know, that was out. She was so cute. And she did that for several years during the war. And I can remember we had a victory garden. It was called after the war. We had a garden during the war because growing vegetables was a good way to have some food. And we always have a garden, had a garden. My dad would dig it up, and from then on my mother took over and she grew all the vegetables. And we always had a lot of fresh vegetables. And then after I was in high school, well, I've got to tell you one story. My mom and dad had a delicatessen business when I was about in the 7th and 8th grade. And that was out of Chicago. That was in Berkeley, Illinois. And when we left Chicago, they had a system of school where if your birthday was in December, you could start school in January, which meant you were always either a half a year ahead or a half a year behind. Mm-hmm. Well, Bud's birthday was also in January, so his was in the same scenario that mine was. So I didn't go from September to June and have it be a year. I went from January to June, and then September to January was a full year for me. But they didn't have this in this little town. It went from September to June. So we either had to go up a grade, half a grade, or down half a grade. I went up a half a grade, and Bud went down a half a grade. And the reason for that was I was big and Bud was little, and it had nothing to do with our grades, our age, or anything else. But I was nearly as tall in the 7th and 8th grade as I am now.
They just want people that look the same size.
Yeah. So kids that came in new wouldn't get picked on, I guess. I don't know. And the school that I went to just had 7th and 8th grade. And there were 2 7th grades, and there were 2 8th grades. And there was a staircase that went up and down the middle, and you changed rooms. You changed rooms 4 times a day, so you were in each one, had 4 different teachers throughout the day. And that was my 7th and 8th grade.
And your grades were good?
I was an excellent student.
And who was your favorite teacher?
I had one teacher, and I thought her name was funny. I don't know if it was so much that she was my favorite. Her name was Pewterbaugh. Pewterbaugh.
And kids would make fun of her, wouldn't they?
They called her Butterball.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I called her Butterball.
And do you remember how to do the quadratic equation from algebra in 7th grade?
No. Math was not my good thing. I like geography.
And do you remember your first bicycle?
Yes.
And how did you do it?
This is a very funny story. We were living in an old granite house, and we lived on a street called Avers in Chicago. And we were about 2 blocks from the streetcar. My dad used to ride the streetcar to work then. People didn't drive their cars any more than they had to, especially during the war, because I was about 10 and the war was still on. And my mom and I would always sit on these granite steps out in front, and Bud would be playing, doing something, and we'd wait for him to get off the streetcar, and we could see him, and he'd walk, and he'd carry his little lunch bucket, and away he'd come. And one day we're looking, and my mother says, "Look at that fool riding that little bike." Well, that fool was my dad bringing a bicycle home for me, because I had been saying, Dad, I want a bike, I want a bike, I want a bike. I was 10 years old. First thing I got on it, I fell, split my leg wide open, and my mother, see, I told you, I told you. She's too young for a bike, too young for a bike. But I loved to ride the bike. I always loved to ride a bicycle. So that's my first bike.
Do you still have it?
No, but I have my second one.
See, I told you.
And that's the one that Greg cut the fenders off of.
Oh,
And my dad used it for many years and then gave it back to me.
good.
I still have it. That was the one that I used to ride all the time in Houston.
And when you were in school, did you play any instruments?
No, but I was a baton majorette.
Baton majorette.
Baton.
Did you ever hit your brother with the baton?
Probably.
Were you good at the majorette?
I don't know.
Were you the head majorette?
I thought I was good. I thought I was good, but no. In reality, when I think back, I was probably not very good. And yeah, I had a good time with it. And it was always fun during football season and the parades that we have through the little town of Elmhurst where we lived when I was in high school. And that's Elmhurst, Illinois.
Now, did you have any boyfriends in high school?
Depending on the season. During basketball, I dated the basketball captain. During football, I dated the football captain. So it depended on the season, and yes, I had a lot of boyfriends. Never one that I was crazy about until my senior year, and his name was Ray Gaulke, Gaulke, and he was going to be a lawyer. Whether he became a lawyer or not, I don't know. But he was blonde, tall, handsome, and had a massive amount of white teeth. I can remember his teeth more than anything else.
What sport did Ray play?
What?
Ray played.
He did not. He did not. He was just a real smart kid. And he was in Quill and Scroll. He was National Honor Society and a lot of other clubs that I was in. And I took Latin in high school for 3 years. And I graduated cum laude. I'm the National Honor Society. I was in the top 10%. And then I had a scholarship to go to Elmhurst College. Of course, it was a grand amount of $250, but at that time I thought it was wonderful. And I got very sick during my senior year. I had pneumonia, viral pneumonia 5 times, and I just about get over it, go back to school and get it again. But I was doing all my schoolwork at home, and I still kept up with it and still graduated with my class. But a doctor, when I had it the 5th time, told my mother that if I went through another winter like I had just gone through, it would probably kill me. But I had so many spots on my lungs and fungal growths from the virus that I needed to go to a dry, warm climate. And we had been through Arizona the year before. When
On a family vacation?
Family vacation. My dad then had a job hauling house trailers back and forth across the country. And we would vacation. And he only did this for about 6 months, but we did go through Arizona. And it was lots of fun. We all had a good time. We'd live in the trailers on the way going, and then we stayed in motels on the way back.
The trailers were made in Chicago, and he delivered them?
Exactly. And we went through Wyoming, we went through Montana.
So you got to go to all the national parks?
All the national parks. We went east, we went up through New York, we went to Albany, we went all through Pennsylvania, went on the Turnpike. That was the funnest. Well, that whole summer we all went together. And then my dad got a job as a salesman with a liquor company after that I was about 13 or 14 that year. But it made such an impression that I loved Arizona when we came through on Route 66. And I says, I'm going to go live in Arizona when I grow up. My mom and dad always thought I was pretty silly, but they ended up here too. But that's when I decided I would come out to Arizona to go to school. So I graduated in 1950, and I came out here in 51. I had to stay out of, I didn't come immediately, I didn't get in that fall. I had to come in January. And it's a good thing I did, but on the way out to Arizona, I got viral pneumonia again. And I ended up, instead of going into college immediately, I was in the infirmary for the first 2 weeks. And at that time, at ASU.
The school?
At school. But it was not ASU then, it was Arizona State College in Tempe. And the doctor, of course, old-fashioned doctor, says, well, you're never going to get rid of this if you don't get in some sun. And of course, you tell people nowadays to go out in the sun to get well, you know, they, oh no, not the sun. So anyhow, he told me to get mineral oil and rub it on my chest and lie out in the sun 15 minutes every day. Well, of course, I have to overdo everything. And I thought this was so great that I put iodine in there. And I put it all over, and I had this really blonde hair. And it got blonder and blonder from the sun. I'd do like this, you know, and rub it through, and the sun bleached it out even more. But I cured myself, or he cured me with the mineral oil. I never had another viral attack again in my life.
And you're tan.
And I was so tan. My mom and dad came out that April. This was, you know, from January to April. My mom and dad came out. They had sold everything. My mother missed me so much. They bought this motel in Phoenix, and they moved out. Finished a year and a half of school, ran out of money, and decided to take off a few months. And in the meantime, I married the sleeping man over here.
So you married him while you were in college?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But we were dating for that whole 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And we married in 1953, June 26, 1953. And I was working. He got me a job because he knew everybody on campus. And he got me a job in the dean's office. I was a secretary. And I was probably the rottenest typer. I failed typing in high school. The only thing I ever failed. That's what brought my average down to the below, you know, right at 10% instead of the top. Never should have taken typing. But I would take dictation off this. Dean would do it on a record. And then I put it on this machine. I had a headset, and I would do it. And I could write it faster than I could just type it, but he wanted it typed. So I would have to take the dictation off, and I would have to redo it 2 or 3 times. And the girl in the front was she was so good, she was helping me. Of course, I was pregnant at this point with Gregory, so they were all very patient with me. And then I really got so good at it after a while that I was going to quit about a month before he was born, which was the end of May. No, you can't quit. So I worked all through June, and I worked up until 4th of July, and Greg was born on the 5th. So, and then I didn't go back. It was to work. He knew I was through at that point. So, and I always wanted to go back to school. Just never did.
What was the name of your mom and dad's hotel?
Flint Motel, because the people they bought it from were from Flint, Michigan.
Where was that at?
It was at 40th Street in Van Buren, which is now the total red light district of Phoenix.
So that's how they made their money here. Went from Al Capone to the red light district in Phoenix.
That's pretty much it.
Good. I'm glad to know that we don't have a CD background in the family.
No one does.
We cut it now. 10 minutes to stop here.
Now,
Yeah.
who in our family was a pirate?
I don't remember any pirates.
Are you sure?
Positive.
Okay.
That was great.
My 4th child is Brian Joseph Bednorz, and he was born July 29, 1960 at St. Joseph Hospital. Husbands were not allowed in the delivery room. They could only spend a few minutes in the labor room. I opened my eyes, and here was this lovely angel holding my hand with a cold cloth, mopping my brow, and she says, "Hello, Joan." I said, "Hi." And she says, I'm Sister Mary Bryan. She stayed with me the entire time. She talked to me and held my hand and just was the sweetest person in the world. And I said, oh, sister, I says, I am going to name my baby after you. And I named my baby Brian Joseph after Sister Mary Bryan and after St. Joseph Hospital.